Point if you have seats next to you, if you could raise your hand so we can let as many people in the room as possible. And don't worry, we're streaming it outside so everyone will get some laughs.
I could go last if I was. Why are you going last? Chip is a wonderful human being. That's why he's going first. I'm not. Orlano. I would say if I had to round up.
Thank you very much. I just did a different panel that was not funny. That was good though. Good panel. I loved it. Racing, skiing, I did everything. Yes.
To Marion.
I am loving it. Yes. It's my favorite. It's my favorite thing to go. It's my favorite time.
So we should get Stephanie Miller here. Have you tried to recruit?
I performed at the Friars Club in New York City.
She was at the RNC
a bunch of times. That's kind of a thing.
I know that, but they sent her to cover it and to do her show from there. It would be very hard for her to do her show from here and then do panel. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
I don't know. If you ask me something.
You know what time she goes to bed?
I went to Colgate University. I studied philosophy and environmental studies.
Go to bed.
Yeah. She was ready
Yeah.
at 6.
That was smart.
At 6:30.
Oh,
So
That's crazy.
the experience.
that's
of
good.
being here
Colgate's okay, but
doesn't
Bucknell's
really
great.
start.
Yeah. I think you're right. You're
I
right.
went to NYU for grad school, social policy. I live in Brooklyn. An Italian in Brooklyn, can you believe it? I'm a first generation Italian American. Does that help? Italian American. Living in Brooklyn, who knew? Tell them that. They'll be shocked.
Huh?
Oh, someone brought fruit. Great. Oh, do we have to be funny, or are we just talking? Okay.
Do I always have a shiny nose? Yes. In real TV, do I put a little Clearasil on my nose? Yes, I do.
No, you have to.
Right. Otherwise, you look like the room you just fell into the studio. It's insane, right?
The New York one doesn't have a makeup person. You can tell because everybody looks like the walking
Yeah,
like
and
Yeah,
watch that
exactly.
once on live. I don't know, 30 seconds per minute, but I thought I'd sing along.
this is going to live on the internet in perpetuity, at least until Hi.
And they're hilarious, but not intentional.
Good morning, folks. Can you hear me
This
okay?
is great, right?
Good morning, folks. I'm going to use my outdoor voice. That was my outdoor voice.
Okay, that's impressive.
I'm Dan Gould. I'm going to moderate this panel as much as I can. Talking with them all is going to be like riding a tiger.
Very nice.
Okay. The name of this panel is Democratic Comedy Hour. So if you are thinking that you're going to, if you're thinking to talk about the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre, you're in the wrong place. Someplace else. We have a big room. We have a full room, and I understand we might have a waiting line. So if there is a seat that you see available to you, please raise your hand so someone can sit who is standing. Is there an open seat any place? Open seat any place? No. Okay. Because it's a large room, because lots of people are trying to hear the panelists, and they may not have as strong a voice as I, although I suspect they may.
Maybe.
If you could be quiet and listen, that'd be great. After the panelists have been, after I've introduced the panelists, and then they have spoken each for 10 minutes on the topic, then we will start a question and answer, and if you would come forward and stand at the aisle at these two mics, and please ask a question. We're not here to hear you, we're here to hear them. Okay? And if you look like a student, I'm going to assume you're a student, and if I insult you, I'm sorry. Students will get first dibs at the questions. It's their campus. And now we'll start. Okay. We have 4 great and I think powerful panelists today. At the far end, we have David Bender. He lives... Okay. I didn't say the far left. I said the far end.
Feel free.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. At my far left. Okay. You all have the biography. I'm not going to read the biography. I'm going to tell you that he used to have a program at Air America called Politically Direct. He had a rule in interviewing people on his program. It was not a successful interview if he did not make the interviewee laugh at least one time. The
Never
next
worked.
panelist,
Never worked.
The serious people.
the next panelist is Giuliana Forlano. She is a first-generation Italian-American. She lives in Brooklyn. I think you might be able to tell from her speech, I'm not sure. She went to Colgate University,
I think so.
which is a member of the Patriot League, and she studied at NYU as well. She has performed at the Friars Club in New York, which is a big deal for
In case you don't know.
Next, we have Tina Dupuis. I asked her how to pronounce her name. She said if I'm hiccuping or something, it's probably correct. Tina Dupuis. She does stand-up comedy, and she does it all the time, everywhere. If it's Tuesday, it must be
In the
done.
shower?
Did.
Anyway, she has done stand-up in a lot of the red states, which is a wonderful experience in places like Scobie, Montana, and Burley, Idaho. Scobie, Montana, and Burley, Idaho. And she says that the local people always try to tell her the scoop of the town, who's sleeping with whom, who's the town drunk, and who just got arrested for something. And finally, the last panelist we have here is
Whoever I am.
whoever you are, Chip Burley. He lives in the Boston area. I said, well, I have a brother in Boston. Where do you live? And he says, I'm not going to tell you. I said, tell me something interesting about you that's not in the biography. And he said, in 1972, I worked for the George McGovern campaign, and I was in Colorado with him as a driver, and he had to get from Fort Collins to Denver in a very short time, and they drove I-25 when it was just 2 lanes that way and 2 lanes this way at 100 miles an hour. With Gary Hart in the back, just about freaking out. Slow down, slow down. George says, keep going, keep going. Okay, so those are the panelists. I'm going to shut up and let them talk 10 minutes each. We start with Chip.
I don't know. Voting Democratic. I always feel like taking a shower after I vote Democratic. Anybody else? Yeah, there's a few. Okay. It'd be nice to put the democracy back in the Democratic Party, don't you think? I mean, come on. I'm from Massachusetts. We sent Elizabeth Warren to like Washington, D.C. We know what a Democrat should be. Oh, seriously. Democratic National Committee, duplicitous, nasty cowards. They could keep the initials, right? It'd be simple. Wouldn't have to change the stationery that much. Democrats currently are one faction of the 1%, contesting for power with the other faction of the 1%, while the rest of us vote occasionally. And they call that a democracy? Come on. What is the percentage of people who vote? So it'd be nice that we have actually had 2 parties. We have one party with 2 wings, and it's annoying. It's just annoying. So this is supposed to be funny, but I'm kind of like in a funk. I mean, because you know, seriously, we look at the promise of Obama, and I know he's done a great job on lots of things. That's entirely true. And he's better than any of the Republicans we could have elected. But, you know, is it good enough? And I guess I have to say I want more. I always want more after I vote Democratic because, you know, maybe I'm a dreamer, but, you know, the last campaign I actually worked on was for George McGovern. And since then, I haven't really felt the urge to drive people around or stuff envelopes or do anything other than just go and vote and then go home and take a shower.
Well, first off, by a show of hands, are there any Republicans here? Yay! Round of applause. Good. Welcome. You guys, I hope you guys find me funnier than anyone else. 'Cause that's my demo. I don't think that there's Democratic humor or Republican humor. I think that there's human humor, and it really revolves around dick jokes. I have been to the most upscale San Francisco comedy club and the most embarrassing pool hall in some horrible place where the microphone nor the lights worked. And surprisingly, the same jokes revolving around the male genitalia worked. And the San Francisco people would go, and they would go, you know, we're very sophisticated. We are very inclusive, and we are very easily offended. And then the most disgusting dick joke in the world, everyone's doing a standing out. And then you would go to places like, I think I played the only Catholic county in Utah. During the first Bush administration. And I looked like this. And you know, I mean, this was a place where and I wish I was making this up. The comedy show had to stop because all of the town's police officers had to come in and make sure that there was nobody on probation at our show. So the Gestapo shows up, and basically, you know, the town drunks, anyone who's gotten into any kind of trouble, is now carted out. So half of our audience was gone. And, you know, I mean, if you're the town drunk, you're also my demo. So it was, you know, it was then Jack Mormon jokes from then on, which landed like a lead balloon. So I personally don't think that when it comes to partisanship, I think funny is funny. And we had a satire panel yesterday, and funny is funny. And you know, but I would like, because I don't think that anyone would believe me otherwise, I would like to give you a review of Fox News' attempt to have a sketch comedy show. Now, this is not farcical comedy. This is real. I now make a living as a journalist. And in 2007, February, does anyone remember this, or do I sound like a mental patient?
I remember.
Okay, so this actually happened. It was
sound
called
like a mental
I do sound like a mental patient. They're not mutually exclusive. So Fox News decided to recruit Joel Cerno, the producer of 24, of course, to create a sketch comedy show for Fox News. This was in 2007. It was the final year of the Bush administration. And the first scene of the first pilot episode opens opens on the date of January 2009. And it's the Oval Office. And it is President Rush Limbaugh. And President Rush Limbaugh says that, you know, now the adults are back in the White House. Weird. And now that there's no more Democrats in the House. And then he said, and you know what? Let's welcome Vice President. And guess who walks into the scene? Ann Coulter. And then Ann Coulter says, and then Rush Limbaugh says, you should watch the half-hour news hour. And Ann Coulter says, yes, and if you don't watch, we'll invade your country, kill your leaders, and convert you all to Christianity.
what then happens for the next, you guessed it, half hour, is that NAMBLA is the same thing as the ACLU, of course. There is a campaign called the Muffin Top Awareness for Fat Chicks. Of course, there's several references to lesbians, which are also Hillary Clinton. One joke is, if Hillary Clinton becomes president of the United States, she will appoint a diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-generation group of angry lesbians. Hilarious. They also take pot shots at Cindy Sheehan, Nancy Pelosi, and the whole thing is see, a little more sexual than laughing. And basically what it turned, I mean, it was widely panned and it bombed and it was canceled before Bush left the White House. But what it really kind of pointed out was the people who are watching Fox News, what they find funny is things that make them feel comfortable. And so what now you see, and what the punch, like ACLU is a punchline, you can see all the time and if you watch Fox News, which I think a lot of Democrats do. It's called hate watch. I think that they always brag about their ratings, and I'm like, yeah, but I think half of that are Democrats who just hate you. But anyway, so I think that if we're gonna talk about Democratic comedy versus Republican comedy, I think that when it comes to comedy, it's really the thing that brings us together. I think that if you are looking to go to a place where your beliefs are just going to be reaffirmed, then you don't really want to go and laugh. You don't really want to be challenged. You want to just kind of nod and go, yeah, totally. So penis is hilarious. To wrap up, penis is hysterical, and partisanship. You got to work really hard, or we have President Rush Limbaugh.
Love Tina. Hi.
She's got the pat. Did you see that?
Well, she wasn't up for the bump.
That's cute.
I didn't want to be weird.
You're cute.
I'm Juliana Furlano. I, too, have performed in many a red state, which doing stand-up comedy really gives you an education, because it takes you to the Chuckle Hut in eastern Indiana where someone in the audience calls the guy who went before you the N-word, and you really get a sense of what the hell you're dealing with when you're out there. So as a Democrat, I guess, because I'm still voting, because I feel like if I don't vote, then the other side's going to win. But if I vote for the Democrats, then much like our friend Chip, I, hold my nose and vote. It was a real education coming from New York. So the reason I thought it was important to say that I'm a first-generation Italian-American, my family came over with the regular story, although they took a plane instead of a boat, and Ellis Island was already closed. But basically, poverty, nothing to eat, no jobs, let's go to the land of opportunity and find out that it's a land of opportunity for some. And I think that's why, immigrants and underserved populations generally have, hopefully decent senses of humor, because it's all we got, right? So you handle it with humor. By the way, I do think there's a lot of dick jokes. Tina's very astute in her idea about dick jokes.
Done a lot of research.
When you're doing any kind of political comedy, there's Dick Armey, there's Dick Gephardt, Dick Cheney, Dick Durbin, and a congressman from New Hampshire, the little-known Dick Sweat. I am not kidding. Why did he not go by Richard, is the question. Why? So I got kids, here's my wife, Titty, over here's my 2 sons, balls, and I just feel sometimes like people's names that's where they wind up. So if your name is Dick, we have an overabundance of dicks in the government. Makes sense. Anyway, if you weren't in the satire panel yesterday, I'll just give a brief review. We talked a little bit about punching up versus punching down. And that's why I think people on the left if they're willing to laugh at themselves, because the farther left you get, the less there is, you're not allowed to joke about anything, and then it gets all crazy. But if you're still sensible, the left has a lock on humor. We've got a lock. Why? Because there's two things you can do in humor. You can punch up or you can punch down. Punching up is a way to equalize power. It's a way to speak truth to power. That's what the left has. Punching down is what the Republicans have. Let's make fun of fat people, the homeless, and let's make jokes about going and killing you and having a religious war. What is funny about that? Don't know. Maybe someone can explain to me. By the way, are you guys all planning on going to the Republican Comedy Hour also? So I'm going to go too.
You guys are so cute.
I'm going to ask questions. Hi. So...
How long does that run? It's about 5 minutes, right?
Good Lord. Okay, so the interesting thing, I think, is this confluence between journalism and comedy that's happening right now, and the fact that things can be so horrendous that we actually need comedians to give us our news. Otherwise, you just can't watch. I mean, how much atrocity can you watch? How much undermining of the Constitution can you watch? How many horrendous things can you watch without a little bit of levity to keep me watching? And I'm specifically talking about John Oliver's show, who he really handles just the most amazing. Yeah, he's amazing. And he goes really deep into, like, one of the shows in particular was about how police are pulling you over and then taking your car and taking your stuff and then buying a TV with the money they just take from you that you never get. I was livid, and I would have been, having a stroke if there weren't jokes sort of peppering that. And I went away learning something from that. So I go to comedians to learn things, and I think a lot of people are doing that. So there's hopefully the media establishment will wise up and start hiring people like our friend John Fugelsang, who used to have a show on Current TV before it was purchased by Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera said, we don't like humor, so they would not hire him. By the way, just briefly, I just came from the independent media panel where someone brought up the RT network as Russia Today as an independent. I would call it an alternative. It's not exactly independent because it is funded by the Vladimir Putin's, who I wouldn't consider an independent news person without a point of view. And a good friend of mine has a show on that network. His name is Lee Camp. And I don't know if you guys know him, but he has a show on that network, and they were hiring correspondents for the show. So I went down to the auditions, right? And they said, Juliana, can you, in very heavy Russian accent, I want you to make up a speech, and then a funny one, 10 minutes, you will then deliver it in front of camera in about an hour. And I was like, oh, you don't know how comedy works. Okay. So lucky for me, a memorized speech in 1 hour. Go. Now back to salt mine. Okay. So it was a little like that. So I did it. And I already had a speech memorized because I was performing already. And I went and I performed and everyone clapped and I felt good. Like, hey, I did this thing and it worked and it was good. And he was watching from his office. I high-fived with my friend Lee. Everyone thought it was great. The people running the camera were stifling laughs, whatever. I did something about coal mining and how it was horrendous. Thanks. Everyone was thrilled. I walked into the office. I did not find one thing funny. You look good on camera. Maybe we can do something else. So actually getting political humor through any sort of semi-mainstream platform is kind of tough these days. Republicans have it harder because they don't have a humor that can make you not feel horrible, like laughing sometimes. I've watched Dennis Miller, by the way, the poster child for Republican comedy, and he does the thing that comedians do. I can see him using the rule of threes and reverses and all the kind of things that make you have a joke. But somehow Again, you just feel dirty after. It's like trickery. Anyway, I think I've taken up enough time. I would like to hear from everyone else, so thanks.
Well, unlike my younger colleagues, I don't do stand-up. I'm too old to stand up. I do sit-down comedy. It's much more comfortable. I recommend it. And I have to say, it was really interesting listening. First off, when Tina mentioned that penis jokes or dick jokes always work, Juliana noted some of the more beloved dicks that we have in the country. But you left out the biggest dick of all, Dick Nixon. This is the dick we all loved. America voted for multiple times.
Tricky dick.
He is the ultimate big dick, and a joke that keeps on giving. You know. So I'm grateful to him. All of us are. You know, if you live long enough, you see things in different packages that have appeared before, and some of what we're seeing now with what's called, and we're going to have a panel on it at the end of the week about Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert. We see John Oliver was talked about. There have always been topical humorists. There was a show very much like John Oliver's called That Was the Week That Was. Some of you remember that in this room. Again, the benefits of aging and just pre-Alzheimer's. I have what's called halftimers. It's not fully there. I can remember half of the things. But there have been great political humorists throughout my lifetime. Mort Saul, anyone remember Mort Saul? And one can't look at Lenny Bruce, and you can't look at Richard Pryor, and not realize that they were, and it wasn't about Democrat or Republican, but they were as trenchant and cogent and funny as it was possible to be, and what they really were was speaking truth to power. In its early days, before it had its 40th anniversary on a red carpet, Saturday Night Live did that. And even occasionally it pops up and does it again. And if you're looking for regular political humor on television, well, you know, Tina Fey, Sarah Palin, who can tell the difference, right?
I can't.
Yes, but you pay attention.
Is there going to be a test?
No.
The funny part is, actually, you put them in a room and it is hard. And here's what I do know. I know that humor is something we better have in this country, because if you can't laugh, you're going to cry. If you can't laugh when you have a president of the United States who says we can put food on our families, or who can say, is our children learning? If you can't laugh, then you cannot survive as, not as a Democrat, as, you know, as a living human being. You can't get through those 8 years. We did, because Democrats actually have a tremendous sense of humor. You had a wonderful man who should still be in the United States Senate from this state, Mark Udall. How many of you remember his father, Mo Udall? Mo Udall wrote a book, and Mo Udall was a member of Congress, and again, for my younger sisters and brothers in the room, he was a member of Congress and ran for president in the 1970s. He ran against Jimmy Carter, could never, and he was considered the funniest man in Congress. He was hysterically funny. Brilliant humorist. He actually wrote a book called Too Funny to Be President, which he compiled some of the stories. But he said after losing to Carter in primary after primary, and he would always come close but lose, he wrote, and he quoted Mark Twain, and if I could read this, I would be able to quote it back to you. He said,
he felt a little bit like the missionary in the Mark Twain story who set out to convert a tribe of cannibals. They listened with the greatest of interest to everything that he had to say, then they ate him. That, my friends, is political humor. And that was a great Democrat. Mo Udall was one of the great Democrats. And you know who else? And many of us remember him. I'm lucky enough to call him friend, but we watched him in Congress for 30 years. Was Barney Frank, who was brilliant but always funny. Always found a way to bring humor to the most serious of issues. And we live in very, very tough times. It's very tough to laugh about some of the things that are going on. It's tough to watch George Bush getting up at the White House Correspondents' Dinner and make a joke about looking for weapons of mass destruction under the carpet in the Oval Office and call that humor. And that the national press let him get away with that, I didn't find particularly funny. But those of us who went through that period survived because we kept our sense of humor. And we understand that part of what makes us, I don't know Democrats, but makes us human, is the ability to laugh, and you were exactly right, not to laugh down, not to laugh at others. My fourth grade English teacher, Mrs. Lester, said, always laugh with someone, not at them. And that's what we do. I hope we do. And there's a great feeling about that. Because you can be a Democrat or a Republican, a conservative or a liberal, but if you can find something to share a joke about, and it doesn't have to be political, you found a part of your basic humanity, your core being that we discover in humor. And that's why this is important. You're all here because it's early in the morning and you want to laugh, and we'll do the best we can. But the truth is, we're here because this is like going to church. Coming to find comedy and coming to find laughter in life is the greatest way to worship being alive. Amen.
So Chip didn't use his 10 minutes. Would like to use a little bit more right now, and then we can go to Tina.
Oh, I just had something to add real quick. But do you want to go?
Every comic wants to go
Okay.
last.
Yeah, I know. I'm every Republican's token liberal friend because they're very comfortable with white people. Who knew? But I feel like we would be missing out if we didn't talk about probably one of the most famous conservative comedians. Goes by the name of Andrew Dice Clay. Yeah. So when I was like a noob, Andrew was hanging out at the Comedy Store a lot, and one day in the green room, he said, "He's like, I don't like dirty humor," and I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, dirty jokes. I don't think they're very funny." It's like, you're messing with me. Like, come on. And I was like, okay, then what do you find funny? He's like, people falling down. It's hilarious. I like to watch people, fall. So, and I think that I think that there is, so when we say they do have a sense of humor with fat lesbians falling.
I'm supposed to follow that.
I had to follow you.
Dick Nixon. When I was in Washington, D.C., when Nixon resigned, and a bunch of us went up on a rooftop to smoke some special cigarettes. We were like looking around, and in the black neighborhood, there were fireworks coming up. And we thought, whoa, fireworks. Let's go down to the White House, see what's happening. So it turned out that we weren't the only 6 people who thought of this. So when Nixon resigned, there were these two streams coming towards the White House. One was from the black community with people banging pots and pans and you know, they had flares, you know, which is kind of creepy for the guards at the White House because, you know, like hundreds of black people with weapons and fire, you know, they were not amused. So, and from the white left community, yeah, DuPont Circle, you know, communist Jews and homosexuals, you know, it's a normal group of us, right? And so we're heading towards the White House and we meet in the middle and we meet in Lafayette Park and we're all, you know, high-fiving and saying, wow, it's great, he's gone, what a dick. And we're laughing. We are laughing our butts off in front of the White House. And there are these journalists doing live stand-up saying, it's a somber moment here in America. Are we going, and we actually had journalists come over and say, why are you laughing? And we go, you don't get it, do you? Anyway, so I just think it's important to understand that if you're involved in progressive social movements, you need a sense of humor because occasionally you actually win something and you really do need to let go. But even when you lose, you need a sense of humor because without a sense of humor, you're not building a democratic civil society in which everyone is going to be welcome and that you're going to greet people with a smile and say, we may have our differences, but there are some things we can laugh together at, one of which is not people falling down. And I just think that one of the great aspects of CWA is the ability to sit on a panel unlike this one, where there are people across the political spectrum, and you can joke with each other, you can be hot under the collar, like I sometimes am, but you have to go have dinner with them at the end of the day. And you know, and at those dinners, there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of friendly smiles, a lot of people saying, "Oh, you really zinged me on that." Yeah. There's a lot of, and so I just want to say that one of the things that keeps me going as a journalist and an activist is the ability to have a sense of humor, even about myself, and sometimes when I go over the top. And I just love being invited to CWA because the root basis of this is the civility and the ability to laugh. So.
Before we go to the questions and answers, I'm going to ask the people in the back to start passing out the edibles that we've arranged. This is that time, right?
No, the time was an hour and a half ago. They take a while to kick in.
Yeah, it's too late now. Okay,
that was my CWA.
We're on our own.
PSA.
Okay. If you want to ask questions of the panelists, you can come to the mics and do so. And while you are approaching, come on. As you're approaching the mic, I have a question for the panelists. If a Democratic politician makes jokes, can he be taken seriously by the American public or by other politicians?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, Barney Frank. I mean, I come from Massachusetts. We adore Barney Frank, and he made jokes all the time, everywhere, and still pushed through amazing legislation and spoke truth to power in the chambers of Congress. So yes, you can.
Obama's hilarious. He is. He's really good at telling jokes. In fact, and he's also said that Michelle Obama is funnier than him, and that is true. I was at the RNC and the DNC 2 years ago, and when Michelle Obama spoke, I understood how the Republicans felt about Chris Christie. Like, why are we voting for the other guy? We should be voting for her. But yeah, I don't think that serious is the opposite of comedy. I don't. I think that the two. I think that comedy is very serious, and if you hang out with comedians, oh my God, they're the most depressive people on the planet.
That's true.
You know, everyone's so disappointed when they actually go behind the curtain and realize that these people are pretty much on the verge of suicide at any given moment, and they're like, "You're not funny." Yeah. Exactly. So I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive at all, and I think that the Obama has really shown that you can really, I mean, hit the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I mean, he crushes. So,
one time I was doing stand-up in Chicago at the Improv, and I was the middle act going on after Mark Curry. You may remember him from, I think it's Saved by the Bell or some show. And no, I was the opener. And I went out, and I said, we're going to give a great warm round of applause to Mark Curry, blah, blah, blah. He did this and that. And we passed, and he goes, thanks. After the show, I'm going to kill myself. Hi, everybody! And I, as a former psychotherapist, was like, oh my God, I got to do something. Do I call someone? And then at the end, he ate, like, granola bars and went home. It was just a craziness. So that is accurate, I'm just going to say. And there's two ways of making jokes to answer that question. One is to pander to the audience. Hi, I'm small, I'm little, love me. Oh, I don't think that's a good idea for politicians to do. But if they can make jokes that are really speaking, again, this idea what David said about speaking truth to power, speaking up for the oppressed, comedy is a way of talking that engages people. Mm-hmm. So if you can do that with the platform of actually maintaining your power and maintaining your dignity and maintaining what you're going to say, then yes, humor is a very important, engaging tool to be used in political discourse, even by our politicians. If they're going to be like this kind of gross pandering, making themselves look like a smaller person, that I would suggest staying away from. And if they don't have the capacity to do a punchline, then they should stay away from humor. Because then you kind of come off looking like, unless you're Republican, then go for it.
Well, the question was, do Democrats have a sense of humor? And can...
No, that wasn't the question.
No,
Okay.
David. Go with it, but we're not going to let you get away with that.
That's because I ate my edible. I have no idea what the question was and what day it is.
We got you.
Want to rephrase the question?
Yeah.
You buy us a drink.
Okay, my question was, if a Democratic politician makes jokes, can he be taken seriously?
All right, can he be taken seriously? The answer, and I completely agree that President Obama can be taken seriously and is very, very funny, has incredible comic timing, and we've seen it. But there's something really important about the distinction between, and Tina touched on it, talking about Fox's attempt at trying to do a humor show. Democrats and progressives can laugh at ourselves. We can laugh at our own foibles, and not cruelly. It's self-deprecatory humor, some of the best. And it doesn't have to be falling down and Andrew Dice Clay kind of funny. Republicans are not good at laughing at themselves, with all respect to our Republican friends here. They get very, very upset when a joke is told. Just ask them about Alan Grayson and see how they respond. They do not like being poked fun at. They take themselves very seriously and do not laugh well at themselves. There are exceptions to every rule, but Democrats take the issues seriously, but very often we don't take ourselves as seriously. And there used to be a time when Democrats, again, this is revealing my age, my long relationship with Grover Cleveland. The truth is, there used to be a time when Democrats and Republicans could laugh with each other, usually after hours. The famous Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would go off and have a drink at 5 o'clock. Right. And then Reagan would get in his pajamas at 6.
And Tip would keep drinking.
And Tip would keep drinking, exactly. Tip was drinking until the next morning.
Tip was tipsy.
But the truth is, that was when our politics were better, because we laughed together. And we took the issues seriously, we took our work seriously, we took governing the country seriously, but we didn't take ourselves so seriously. And, I keep remembering, and this is another edible flashback to that opening scene. Did you all see Newsroom with Jeff Daniels, the wonderful Aaron Sorkin show? And that opening panel where he's having an out-of-body experience, thinking about, is America the greatest country in the world? And he finally breaks down and says, no, we're not the greatest country in the world. We used to be. We're not anymore. And he talked about the reasons why, and he had a line in there that just always haunts me. He said, and we didn't used to scare so easily. And that's where the humor is gone, is that we're now so afraid of so many things and of each other that it's much harder to laugh. It is why, thank God, or whatever higher power you wish to thank, for Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, Tina, Juliana, Chip, people who can remember that, again, our humanity comes from our ability to laugh and survive all of this together, even in the darkest of times. So, yes.
Our
is the
first
answer.
question.
Thank you all. Dead.
Is it working?
No,
No,
you
just eat
gotta
the mic.
sort
Real
of-
close, real close.
No, no.
Eat the mic.
Real
Eat the
close.
mic. Eat
There
the
you
mic. Literally.
Your
Rest
outside
it on your
voice.
chin like this.
Okay. I feel like Robert Plant here. Hey, I'd like to ask the panel to please, all of you, give us your favorite quick joke. Could start a whatever walks into a bar, right? So, would you all give us, please, your favorite quick joke? Thank you.
So walks
Okay.
into a bar.
A priest, a
Hey,
rabbi,
whatever.
a priest, a rabbi, and a minister, a Jew, a Catholic, and a Protestant all walk into a bar. Bartender says, "What is this, some kind of joke?"
Then there's the one about the magician who was walking down the street and turned into a bar. But it's okay because he left the door ajar.
I don't do those jokes. I don't have that. Other than the man walks into a bar and says, ouch.
There you go. That works. See?
That's the one I got. Sorry.
Well, you passed that bar. Well done. No, I don't do the walk into the bar jokes either, but I have to say, one of the things about being in Boulder, and I now understand why cannabis is legal here, is it's really much harder to drink at this altitude.
Yes! Yes!
It is much harder to drink.
Yes.
You can drink water, but you know
No.
why? I get why cannabis passed here, because that doesn't dehydrate you. That's my bar joke.
This coffee is better than crack. I'm not even kidding you. I've had this much, and it's I guess it's the altitude. You can't drink the coffee.
It's a Rocky Mountain High.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about this? Man walks into the farm. Do we have any of those jokes? I went in there as a New Yorker. The farm is where you get the weed. And my housing guy took me there because I wanted to see it. I've never seen a dispensary. And I walked in, I thought, oh my God, this place smells like weed. He was like, yes. You know, you have that trigger of like, something's happening here and we have to be careful because the fuzz is going to get us. Didn't happen. It's good.
Anyway, very funny man Al Franken became a senator, and not that he hasn't been funny, but anytime I've seen him, he's been probably more serious than he has to be. So you think he's like pushing down the humor so he'll be taken more seriously?
I can actually speak to this because I worked with Al at Air America Radio. We've been friends for a long time, and he had an incredible burden for someone who is as funny as he is, and he's incredibly funny. You remember he moved back from New York to Minnesota to run for Senate, and everyone said it's going to be impossible. You know, you've spent these years at Saturday Night Live. All you have to do is read the book about what went on in those writing rooms, and there's no way you're going to beat Norm Coleman. So the advice he got, and I was there when he got the advice, was if you win, don't tell jokes, and don't give any interviews outside of Minnesota for the first term. And you know what? He did that. And you notice which in this wave election, which Democrat got reelected with the biggest numbers was Al Franken, because he showed that he cared about the people of Minnesota. He didn't play to his strength, and ever since Election Day, he's gotten a lot funnier, which is nice to see. I think he's free to be funny again. We should have had buttons, free Al Franken.
Well, there's a lot of politicians who are really good, or that are funny and are, have comedic timing. Because if you're a politician, you want to charm people, you want to get them on board with you, you want to lead people, and if you are really good at that, you're really good at telling a joke, and you're also in front of people all the time and addressing crowds. And so it's the the serious policy wonks versus the the kind of cards. I think the two are you would kind of be shocked if you go and listen to these politicians. The really good ones, they're saying all sorts of hideous stuff, and you're like, that's hilarious. What? Mm-hmm. So I think that the Al Franken was just able to kind of, because it's such a burden have to be hilarious all the time and have to be on all the time, that it was almost like when he got into the Senate, it was like a retirement where he could just like finally do all the stuff that he had criticized for so long, which I'm sure at some level was liberating. If you've had to live with the shtick of being hilarious, like I have, it becomes pretty laborious after a while. I knew that I was never going to be the funniest comedian in the world, but as far as journalists, I'm already in the top 5. Not funny people at all. Want to talk about people who are suicidal? Go to a green room and try and drink with those people, because the filing room is like there should be like a suicide hotline to where journalists are hanging out.
I spoke with Al Franken at the Democratic Convention this last year, and he told me one thing. He said, "Oh, you're a comedian?" And then the way that he talks, slow and takes time to speak with you. He said, "Just so you know, if you ever run for office, they're going to take everything you said as a joke and assume you meant it for real." And then he just turned and went on and shook more hands. It's really great. It's really great.
So you've mentioned Oliver, Colbert, Stewart, and certainly love those folks. What do you think of Bill Maher?
Well, I had the privilege back actually when his show was still on ABC of doing Bill Maher's show sitting next to Ann Coulter, and lived to tell the story. It was really interesting because it was right after 9/11, and Bill Maher and Ann Coulter were in pretty much complete agreement on the idea that we needed to profile Muslims because they were the ones who were blowing up buildings and so forth. So I somehow dissented from that point of view. Generally, I like Bill Maher a lot, and I think he does a great public service. I don't agree with him all the time at all, but I think what he does and has done now for 10 years on HBO and longer with the ABC show is exactly what we need, is to bring a variety of views, including a lot of people that he doesn't agree with, onto the show and speak truth to power and do it in a way that gets people to think. You can't find a cast that will include Rand Paul and Rachel Maddow very often, but you can on Bill Maher's show, and I think that's a great public service. So I really like what Bill Maher does.
No, I'm just going to agree with David that that is the charm of that. You never see people from it's either the Republican NewsHour, which are all the Sunday shows, or MSNBC. It's really polarized. And then but on every Friday on HBO, you have people who normally would not be seen on the same television screen together and sitting next to one another, and because it's like it's all I think a lot of the, especially on television, a lot of the divisiveness is really artificial. I mean, when you go on television, this is true. They go, okay, you're going to defend this position, and me, I'm a person who I could probably see both sides of an issue most times, but they'll say this is what you have to argue over, and this person is going to be arguing for something else, and so it's produced to look like you are adversaries when probably there's a lot of common ground, but it's not going to come out in 3.2 minutes that you have on television. So I think that with the format that he has, it actually does kind of add to discourse because there's no commercial breaks and they have a pretty good, healthy amount of time to kind of go over and talk about things.
I totally agree. He's talented. I just long for the day when Islamophobia is not something that gets a free pass.
Speaking of which, are there boundaries in humor, political humor, or are there not boundaries?
I think the boundary is being funny.
Yeah.
I mean, if that was the dust up over Trevor Noah. Some people, the person who is going to be filling in for Jon Stewart on the Daily Show, some people went back and looked at his tweets and they found them to be offensive, and then other people were like, well, it's not offensive, it just wasn't funny. And so there was like this Venn diagram of who thought it was offensive and who thought it was unfunny, and really it was both. And it was offensive because it wasn't funny. I think that you can get away with murder. I mean, that's what the whole charm of comedy in the first place is. You can get away with murder as long as the murder is hilarious.
I think that the boundary is personal to the comedian. I find that when I'm looking at certain things, like my show, I try to not leave people feeling dirty about laughing about something. Mm-hmm. I was, in stand-up you'd go and you'd hear a lot of other stand-ups, and sometimes they'd make a joke that would work technically. It is an art form. Like, you'd be like, wow, that's a Picasso level joke, what they did with the words and the way they performed it. But I feel awful because I'm laughing at someone kicking a baby. So I thought at one point I made this decision, that didn't really happen, but something similar. I would never. At some point I made this decision, like, can we use comedy to let people leave feeling empowered and connected with the audience and feeling good and not feeling like you're just dirty. I don't know. And so that's what I try to do. So when I'm picking what I'm going to make fun of, sometimes we come up with my group, we come up with some really funny stuff. There's a writer's room, and since I'm the host of the show, I'm allowed to have the final call on what is going to come out of my mouth. And there's really funny jokes that don't go out over the air because that's not the purpose of the show, just to be funny. So I think it depends on who the comedian is. If the comedian is just to get the laugh, just to be funny, they'll do everything to do that, fine. If there's a different agenda for the show, then there are going to be some boundaries. So I think it's comedian specific, at least for me.
I actually had a real life experience with this. I worked as an advisor to Howard Dean when he ran in 2003 and early 2004, but right prior to Iowa. But there are those who remember Iowa and those who try to forget. Those of us who were there try to forget. But we did an event for Howard in New York. It was a comedy event. And comedy in politics is really tough because, as the observation was made, they think everything you say is serious. When it's written down, you're associated with it. So we had a group of comics performing for Howard at this pre-event, and Howard's in the green room, and he's listening, but he can't quite hear what's coming out of the microphone. And this was the time, do you all remember when Trent Lott paid homage to Strom Thurmond? And it was very controversial because, Strom Thurmond ran as a racist, and, it was his 100th birthday or whatever it was. And so the comic got up and said, I'm neither racist or homophobic, but I'm about to do a Trent Lott joke. And then he launches into a Trent Lott imitation, and he uses the N-word and what I first discovered is called the F word, which was a derogatory term for gay people. I had never heard it called the F word before.
I was going to say feminist.
I know what the F word is.
But it wasn't called, the F word meant something else, right?
Yeah.
But so he used both of those in the context of this joke. And he was actually trying to show that Trent Lott was absurd and racist and homophobic. And it was a very funny bit, frankly, if you're in the room. Howard was not quite in the room. Howard was over there behind a curtain. So he could hear just the words. And he heard the N-word and he heard the F word, and he said, that's outrageous. I can't go out after that. I can't follow that. They'll associate me with endorsing that. I said, I couldn't hear it because I was with him, but I had a pretty good sense, and I went back and looked at the tape, and I was exactly right, that it was done in the context of telling a joke. He ultimately did go out. He disassociated himself with the comic, which was, I thought, unfair, truth be told. But it did beg a question, and there I was in the green room with his advisors, and I said, suppose this were a black comedian using the N-word. And that happens all the time. All the time. Is that appropriate? Is that a boundary that a black comic can cross and a white comic cannot?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's not funny.
It's not funny. It's
Well,
400 years of history.
But the point that a lot of people make in the African American community is it's not funny for the black comics to do it either. That's the part I don't get. I think it's one or the other. I think it's funny for everybody or funny for nobody. And if a gay comic makes a joke and wants to use the F word or what was it, go homo or love a homo or
Thank a homo.
Thank a homo. Yes, that's Tina yesterday when we did a panel on gay marriage
See, she was
said
there.
thank a homo.
She's still laughing.
You know, is the word homo, did I take offense? I didn't at all. I knew the spirit in which it was meant. There are people who would. The question is, how do you define those boundaries? And for me, I really, literally in the moment where people were panicking and staff people were going, we have to get him out of here. He'll be associated with us. He's going to be pilloried. I thought, this is a really interesting question. What is appropriate and who decides? And I agree with you. The comic has to decide, but I think there ought to be some kind of consistency. And I get the 400 years, but then I also agree with those in the African American community who say nobody should be doing this. If that's the position, then what's right for one is right for all. That's my view.
I disagree. I think that if I can do really funny shticks about periods, but I don't think that should be off topic for men. I think that if it's funny, it's funny. I know that we want to think that all humor that we like is stuff that's also politically correct, but I think that a lot of humor pushes boundaries. I mean, George Carlin, that was not that. I don't even know if that was funny. It was like enraged anger and that was something that pushed boundaries, and I think that Chris Rock has used the N-word pretty damn hilariously.
Yeah.
And I would not censor that at all. I think that comedy shouldn't be censored. I think the problem with comedy now is that it's all on the internet in perpetuity, and what you used to be able to do in a club and kind of work out, because when you're a comic, you really it's like you're a fruit bat, right? You're on stage, you can't see anything, and the only thing you can do is make a noise and see what comes back at you, the echo, right? Oh. So you get your chops, you develop this sixth sense, and that way you can develop the ability to sense when you've made strangers butt pucker because you've said the wrong thing. Or they you can not be able to see anything, but you know that every person in the room has just crossed their arms and went, ugh. This is a sense that you get, and how you get that is essentially by bombing. You do something that it doesn't work, and then you do something different the other day, and you can cut your teeth, and you can say something that is shocking and not funny and stupid and whatever, but it doesn't matter because it's a group of people who are stupid drunk anyway. They're not going to remember it. And they're essentially like a forgiveness, because everyone's going to wake up the next morning and not remember anything, or your name for that matter.
Except it's on the internet.
Well, but now it's on the internet. Now people bring out their phones, and now it lives in perpetuity, and it's out of context. And so things like Shirley Sherrod kind of, if you take just one piece of an act and whatever, you can't bomb without everyone knowing about it. I mean, I couldn't imagine trying to start stand-up these days where there's just there is no forgiveness whatsoever, or forgetfulness when you completely bomb, which you should if you ever get good. You're going to fail a lot as a comic.
So there's also, and this goes along, piggybacks on what you were saying, people forget that when your conversation is mediated through a technology, you're losing a lot of stuff, right? If I'm looking at you, I know if you're about to laugh, I know if you're not, because I'm a human being, and I know how to read faces, and I have whatever it is that helps me read an audience, right? So if I'm here at the CWA, I will do my smartest dick jokes for you people or whatever. I will do my smartest. You can do puzzle solving. I trust that you will get it. If I'm going into another kind of place, they're paying, not that CW is paying, but they're paying you to make the audience laugh. There is a capitalism to this. They're paying you. If you don't make their audience laugh, you don't get asked back. And then you don't go on to the next part of your career. And then you don't go on to the next one and the next one. So there is this thing where you do kind of have to make the audience laugh in order to consider yourself, a comedian. So I once, for example, I was asked to do like a Catholic fundraiser. I was like, oh, I wonder why you're asking me. Okay, so I went, and they were like, no dirty jokes, nothing blue, nothing's got to be Disney Channel appropriate. I'm like, I don't have, okay. So I tested it, right? They were the dirtiest. Yeah, they were. They were not filthy. They did not want anything too graphic. But if you went slightly blue, these are Catholics. They went to Catholic school. They had the nuns, they're dirty and repressed, so they're, you know what I mean? What? So, it's the truth. Everyone knows, dirty school girl. Anyway, you have to be able to do this thing where you read your audience, which you cannot do when you're looking at your iPhone, like, what are these people going to like? It just doesn't happen. It is a human one-on-one interaction, which is why live performance is so much more of an art and you having an interaction than if you're watching something on television. That's my plug for going out and seeing live comedic performances.
Although I need to point out that you just said exactly opposite things. One talked about fruit bats.
Yes.
And the other said you're seeing the audience and you can connect. And I think it is an interesting thing. We can all see you. The lights are up in the house. And it is a very different experience when you're working in the dark. And when
I disagree. Because there's something, you're like, for me, I'm seeing it from here. You're like feeling it. It's not your eyeballs. Your eyeballs, you could, you close your eyes, if someone's standing right here. There's, you have to have this sense of the room that goes beyond just like looking at your face, It's like,
and I know it from radio.
Yeah.
It is when we're doing radio and we're going out there, there's no, unless you're taking calls, you don't get that feedback. You're just going out into the world. It's like being a writer. You can write a book, and you don't get to see what happens when someone turns the page and if they've laughed at the joke you've made. You don't know. You hope so, but you don't know. And it is interesting. At the beginning, we talked about making people laugh. I made Al Gore laugh once on the phone.
Wow.
Yeah. No, that's going on my tombstone, okay? It's one of my proudest achievements, and it was a phoner, and you remember famously in the debate with Bush that Al Gore watched Bush go on and on about something and then went into the open microphone, and he did it repeatedly, and he didn't realize that this was making him look silly as he was sighing in frustration at Bush's absurdity, right? So I'm on the phone with, it was when Inconvenient Truth came out, I'm on the phone with the Vice President, and we're talking, and I say, Mr. Vice President, I would be remiss in telling you that this election coming up, this was the one, I guess, that Kerry ran in, that there are a lot of people who are saying that they really would like you to run. I'm getting these calls, my listeners, I have to, and I'm halfway through the sentence, and I hear,
the Gore sigh.
And I stopped myself, and I said, Mr. Vice President, did you just sigh into an open microphone? Have you learned nothing? And he cracked up. He just started laughing, and it was not fake laughter. And as I say, it's on my headstone. When I'm gone, I want to be remembered for that.
So we have a question here.
Yeah, I figured this would be an opportune time to ask it because the panel touched on it a little bit with the Trevor Noah situation that's been going on. What is the panel's stance on the recent string of controversies surrounding things that comedians joke about on stage? Is there any sort of bipartisan commiseration when it comes to comedians sticking up for other comedians?
Yes.
Well, like what in particular are you referencing?
I mean, the most recent one's the whole Trevor Noah with reading his tweets, out of context, but it seems to happen on a pretty consistent basis now that we have such access to social media.
Let me just speak to this quickly. There is a band of brothers feeling about comedians because it is an impossible task for stand-ups. You're up there, people do everything you think, and it really toughens you. They say, shut up, show us your boobs, you're not funny. They say all that stuff. Not to the guys, maybe, I don't know. But
I get it all the time.
I might shout at myself. Okay, so there's this sort of war, there is this band of brothers kind of feeling that like you really do support each other. They generally don't, they understand how hard it is and how easy it is to make a mistake that then the public can just pile on, and I think people have to understand that art is a process and that comedy is an art form. You're not, Huffington Post just started this comedic nighttime show with no comedians on it because they somehow assume that anyone who has a kind of a personality is hilarious and knows how to be funny, which is something that makes me mad. But yes, there is this idea of sticking up for each other. Sometimes if it goes too far, I've seen I forget what it was that Gilbert Gottfried did, but there were people taking one side and people taking another side, but at the same time saying, but at the end of the day, he's a comedian. And so they do stand up for him. No one stands up for Dennis Miller, though, that I've seen. Because he doesn't partake in the little camaraderie of comics that is kind of going on behind the scenes.
We used to not have the outrage machine. This is a very new thing where you can say something, just as an example, you can say something that's, with 300, let's just say there was someone with around 300 Twitter followers who decided to tweet something kind of not really that funny about black people and AIDS in South Africa. And then the entire world, essentially, for the next 12 hours that this person was on their flight, was basically wanting blood. It starts spiraling out of control, and everybody wants to see her head because she was a publicist at a reputable firm, and so she said the tweet was, "I'm going to South Africa. I hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding. I'm white." Now the thing is, her family was she was a white woman. Her family was really involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and she was very it was this a family that was very progressive, and this was something that to her, and also said in a South African accent, was funny. She said something in a relatively obscure. This was 300. Nobody followed her until she made this horrible joke, and it was and she got fired, and it was this whole thing. And I think who's been doing a really great job of this is John Ronson has been writing about this phenomenon. And so if you have comedians who, by definition, are supposed to push boundaries, make you think and provoke you in some way, whether it's ridiculing people in power or making, being a mirror to culture, sometimes you fall short of that. And then there's this, I want to somehow punish them. The other day, I wrote that, I tweeted that, because there was the people in, I'm sure you guys were following this, but Memories Pizza in Indiana, they said that there was this pizza, the governor of Indiana, Mike Pence, was like, okay, well, we just passed this new law for religious freedom, but it's not for discrimination. And then there were immediately these people on television who owned a pizza restaurant, and they were like, we love this law because we are never, this means that now we don't have to cater gay weddings. Yay. And then, this local issue turned into a national brouhaha, and you had people flaming them and going on Yelp and calling them bigots and doing all this, and basically, internet vigilantism. And I tweeted that I disagreed with the people at Memories Pizza, and I also disagree with the people who went after them, because it's that's not how we are able to bridge differences. This is not how we're able to have people who we just label as bigots, have them understand why it's hurtful to say that stuff, and why when you talk about Christian charity and it's not for all people and it's just for people you agree with, that's not actually Christian charity. I think that we can have a greater conversation and come and have people come over to our side without going and blowing up their Yelp page, and ultimately they ended up now they're, I think they raised, last I checked, $800,000 just from people who really liked the idea that they could deny services. But this outrage machine makes comedy suck. It makes trying to be funny suck. It's like, and you're kind of terrified. As soon as there's some kind of tragedy, you almost expect that someone's not, they're not going to be paying attention. There's some tragedy, somebody blew up something, right? And you're just waiting for the scheduled tweet that is going to look tone deaf and everyone's going to freak out about, and then it's going to be a story on Mediaite the next day, and then everyone's going to pile on what they thought, and, is this appropriate? And then it's like 36 hours later, maybe this person still has a job or not. And it's a horrible way to live, and we are all responsible for it. It's a crowdsourcing thing, and I think that we should all stop and get a sense of humor, allow people to be stupid without being punished. Stupidity should not be a crime. And I'm not talking about the First Amendment. I'm talking about just human civility and decency. Like, stop trying to hurt people who say dumb things.
Well, also,
thank you.
Clap for Tina. Very important. Oh,
Shift.
As odd as this may seem, I've never done stand-up comedy, and I didn't originally think that I was particularly funny, but I spent 30 years studying, race hate groups and homophobia. So I worked for a think tank that we studied how people organize to do terrible things to other people they don't like. And I found that, getting in front of an audience live, as a journalist, I could write about it. As a scholar, I could write peer review articles. But when I got in front of an audience, then I'd say, let's talk about killing black people. Exactly. It was like a downer. And the only way I could talk about these activities and the social dynamics was to tell slightly inappropriate jokes. Because otherwise people were going to leave looking for, the way to commit suicide because it was so awful. And whether it was racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, whatever. The only way I could reach people in a way that allowed them to consider this message and the complexity of it was to be funny. And so that goes to what a lot of these actual comedians have said. Comedy is the language that reaches into everybody's heart and brain. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But without comedy, human progress would be just a trail of tears.
One last question over here. One last. Let's let this woman ask a question. Okay?
Something you just said.
Speak into the mic.
Something you just said about letting people be stupid and not giving them a hard time for that. So where does that put Michael Moore?
What about him?
His whole shtick is exposing people who are doing stupid things.
Right, and that's a documentarian. I think it's different when it's.
Oh, so I guess that was another part of the question. Is he a comedian?
He's been on comedy panels that I've set up at these forums in New York City, and he was thrilled that people saw him as a comedian and that he was invited because he, again, is one of these people who says, anyone who uses the technique of humor in their work is kind of a comedian. You don't have to be a stand-up in order to be a comedian. And I think it does bear saying, that, to go off of what Tina just said, this incivility. Remember back to at the beginning of this panel when Tina said, they actually tell you, you're only going to defend this and you're only going to defend that. So all of this extreme partisanship that we are seeing as just consumers of the media is a show.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind when you're watching TV. They're on purpose saying you can only have 2 minutes and you can only defend this. It's like MUN from college. You have to debate. There has to be conflict because one of the things that people want is a conflict because conflict keeps eyeballs on the news channel. If it's all like, oh, this is fascinating, people tend to tune out, unfortunately, in our society. So I think that's just kind of an important piece here is that this enormous conflict is staged. We have to be able to see through that as an audience.
Yeah, but, I mean, just because this was directed towards me, I just
Not toward you,
but the outrage machine that I was talking about with social media and everyone having these like campaigns to like somehow punish people who say dumb things. I think that living in a free country, you can actually be. I mean, I can disagree with you, and you can be my neighbor, and I can be civil to you, and we Americans can. You can be a bigot, you can be an asshole, and you can still be. I can still, not have to, ruin your business or hurt you in some way. But I think that the Michael Moore example is different. I mean, I report people saying stupid things all the time. They're normally politicians. I pretty much keep my ridicule of politicians because they're public figures and they deserve it, and most of them are corrupt and full of shit. So and I'm incredibly lazy, and I have a column to fill every single week. So it's like, just get a bunch of quotes of them saying retarded things, and then I'm, and now you're going to get on me for using the R word. I know, because it's liberal. So you can just cross your arms and sigh. But but that to me is kind of the function of humor and document and people trying to get away with saying something different than they did is different than some like 23-year-old publicist losing her job because she said something stupid and just so happened to tweet it, which was another thing that was stupid.
And we are a comedy panel that I want to end by being Ed McMahon to Tina's Johnny Carson.
Whoa. Cool.
The funniest tweet, and we talked about it at our panel yesterday, that I've heard in a very long time was actually written by Tina. And so I'd love her to share it with you.
Oh, God, that's pressure. I have a weird glitch where if I write something down, I can no longer. If I write it, I don't remember it. This morning, I looked at. I was like, oh, I looked up a column that I'd written 2 years ago. I was like, this is really. Oh, I wrote this. Okay. I believe the tweet was so far every case of Ebola in the United States got it by helping people. So relax, Republicans, you're in the clear.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Okay, it's 12:20. You please move to your next class.